They say time travel isn't real. But what if you could step straight into the 70s and 80s? The neon glow, the disco beats, the golden beaches, and the cities that defined an era. It's all still out there, waiting to be rediscovered. Today, we're revisiting the destinations that will take you back in time, where the spirit of those unforgettable decades still lingers. From retro nightlife to untouched cultural gems, these places will transport you to the past. Let's explore Miami's South Beach. If there's one place that perfectly embodies the 80s, it's Miami's South Beach. The pastel-colored Art Deco buildings, palm-lined streets, and neon signs still shine as brightly as they did in the era of Miami Vice. Walking down Ocean Drive, you can still see classic cars parked outside historic hotels, just like in their prime. Many clubs and bars still play 80s synth-pop, making it feel like time never moved forward. South Beach wasn't just about the looks. It was a cultural hotspot where celebrities, musicians, and trendsetters shaped the nightlife scene. Today, iconic spots like the Versace Mansion and the Carlyle Hotel still stand, offering glimpses into a glamorous past. Retro diners, neon-lit cocktail lounges, and rollerbladers gliding along the boardwalk create a nostalgic atmosphere that feels straight out of an 80s movie. If you want a deeper dive into the past, visit the Art Deco Historic District, which preserves Miami's golden era. At night, the neon signs glow in a way that feels almost cinematic, reminiscent of when South Beach was the epicenter of nightlife. Whether you're lounging at a retro beach bar, riding in a vintage convertible, or exploring old diners, Miami's South Beach is a living tribute to 80s excess, style, and energy. Route 66. For a more rugged 70s experience, Route 66 is your highway to the past. This legendary road still carries the spirit of an era when road trips were about freedom, discovery, and adventure. Before GPS and digital maps, travelers relied on paper road maps, pit stops at small-town diners, and the thrill of the unknown. Many classic motels, drive-in theaters, and gas stations remain untouched, making Route 66 a true time capsule. Stops like Delgadillo's Snowcap Drive-In in Arizona still serve up old-school burgers and shakes with a side of humor, just like they did back in the day. Further down the road, the Cadillac Ranch in Texas is a reminder of the quirky roadside attractions that made Route 66 famous. This art installation features half-buried classic Cadillacs, spray-painted by visitors in true 70s counterculture fashion. For music lovers, Route 66 also connects to the golden age of rock and roll. Towns along the route still play classic rock, and old jukeboxes bring back the sounds of the Rolling Stones, Fleetwood Mac, and Led Zeppelin. Whether you're driving a classic muscle car or a modern vehicle, cruising down Route 66 is like stepping into a 70s road trip movie, where every mile tells a story. Goa, India. If you're looking for a 70s beach town where time has stood still, Goa, India is the place to be. Once a secret haven for backpackers and hippies, Goa became the ultimate destination for free-spirited travelers seeking peace, music, and a connection with nature. Today, while modern developments have arrived, the essence of 70s Goa still lingers in its beaches, markets, and communities. During the 70s, travelers from all over the world gathered in Goa, drawn by its laid-back atmosphere, psychedelic music, and spiritual retreats. The beaches of Anjuna, Vagator, and Palolem were once filled with nomadic artists, musicians, and yogis living in harmony with nature. Even today, these beaches retain their bohemian charm. The Goa Flea Market, originally started by hippies who sold handmade jewelry and art, continues to operate, offering a blend of vintage and contemporary crafts. If you want to relive the past, attend a Goa trance party, where the electronic beats echo the psychedelic sounds of the 70s underground music scene. From open-air yoga retreats to simple beach huts serving homemade food, Goa remains a paradise where time moves slowly, and the 70s never truly ended. Berlin's Kreuzberg. For an experience that combines music, nightlife, and rebellion, Berlin's Kreuzberg district is a time machine set to the late 70s and early 80s. Once a hub for punk rock, underground clubs, and political activism, Kreuzberg still retains its raw energy. The graffiti-covered buildings, dimly lit bars, and alternative culture make it feel like you've stepped into a rebellious movement from the past. During the Cold War, Kreuzberg was a melting pot of radicals, artists, and immigrants, all pushing back against authority. The district became the heart of the punk and new wave music scenes, with legendary venues like SO36, where bands like the Dead Kennedys and Die Toten Hosen performed. Today, SO36 is still active, hosting punk rock shows that feel as raw and intense as they did in the 80s. Beyond the music, Kreuzberg's alternative art scene is another blast from the past. The streets are filled with murals, anarchist bookshops, and vintage record stores that still sell original pressings of classic 80s albums. Whether you're grabbing a drink in a candlelit dive bar, walking past old squatter buildings, or listening to live underground bands, Kreuzberg immerses you in an 80s subculture that refuses to fade. Las Vegas. For a mix of Hollywood glam and 80s excess, Las Vegas is the ultimate throwback. While the city constantly reinvents itself, some places have held on to their vintage charm. The Flamingo Hotel, one of the original icons of Las Vegas, still shines with its neon signs and mid-century casino style. Walking through Old Vegas is like stepping into a time when Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra ruled the entertainment scene. One of the best ways to experience 80s Vegas is by visiting the Neon Boneyard, a museum filled with vintage neon signs from old casinos, hotels, and motels. These glowing relics tell the story of a time when Las Vegas was all about showmanship, glitz, and over-the-top entertainment. For the full experience, head to the Peppermill Lounge, a cocktail bar frozen in time with its neon-lit booths, mirrored ceilings, and old-school drinks. Many of the city's older casinos, like the Golden Nugget and El Cortez, still maintain their vintage charm, making it easy to relive the glory days of Vegas when everything was about style, indulgence, and high stakes. Havana, Cuba. Havana is a place where time seems to have frozen, and if you're looking for a true 70s experience, this is the city to visit. The moment you land, you're greeted by a parade of classic American cars from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, still cruising the streets as if they never went out of style. Havana's unique isolation from the outside world has kept much of its mid-century charm intact, making it one of the most authentic places to relive the past. One of the best ways to experience 70s Havana is by taking a ride in a vintage Chevrolet or Ford, complete with a bench seat and a radio playing classic salsa or jazz. Walking through old Havana, you'll see pastel-colored buildings, wrought iron balconies, and cobblestone streets that feel like a scene from an old travel poster. Many of the bars and restaurants still maintain their original decor, with dimly lit interiors and live bands playing Buena Vista social club-style music that transports you straight to the golden era. For nightlife, the Tropicana Club is a must-visit. It has been hosting cabaret performances since the 1930s, and its extravagant shows still capture the glitz and glamour of Havana's past. The smoky atmosphere, dazzling costumes, and Latin beats create a vibe that's pure 70s romance. If you want a truly immersive experience, Havana is where history, culture, and nostalgia blend seamlessly. Tokyo's Shinjuku. Tokyo's Shinjuku district is a place where the neon-lit future imagined in the 80s still exists. Walking through the narrow alleyways and towering streets filled with flickering billboards, you can almost feel the influence of classic cyberpunk films like Blade Runner and Akira, both of which took inspiration from this very place. The glow of old-school pachinko parlors, arcades, and karaoke bars makes it feel like the peak of the 80s never ended here. One of the best places to relive the 80s tech boom is Akihabara, Tokyo's legendary electronics district. While it has evolved, you can still find vintage gaming consoles, old-school gadgets, and shops selling retro anime and manga collectibles from the 80s. Some arcades still have classic Street Fighter and Pac-Man machines, where you can play the games exactly as they were decades ago. If you're a fan of 80s music, Golden Guy, a small district of narrow alleys packed with tiny bars, is the perfect spot. Many bars here play retro Japanese city pop, new wave, and synth music from the 80s, creating a nostalgic atmosphere that takes you back to the rise of Walkmans, VHS tapes, and neon-lit nightlife. From the buzzing nightlife to the vintage tech culture, Tokyo remains one of the most visually stunning throwbacks to the 80s era. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury. If the 60s and 70s had a capital for hippie culture, it would be Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. This neighborhood was ground zero for the Summer of Love in 1967, but even in the 70s, it remained a beacon for free spirits, musicians, and artists. Today, the area still preserves much of that counterculture energy, with vintage record stores, tie-dye fashion, and psychedelic murals decorating the streets. Walking down Haight Street, you'll find legendary music shops like Amoeba Music, where crates of vinyl records from the 70s rock era sit waiting to be rediscovered. Bands like the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Janis Joplin once lived in this neighborhood, and their legacy is still felt in local cafes, secondhand bookstores, and vintage clothing shops that proudly display relics of the past. For an authentic 70s experience, visit Golden Gate Park, where weekend drum circles, open-air concerts, and art gatherings keep the bohemian vibe alive. Whether you're grabbing a coffee in a psychedelic-themed cafe or exploring a vintage thrift store packed with bell-bottoms and fringe jackets, Haight-Ashbury is one of the last remaining places where the spirit of the 70s counterculture is still alive and thriving. Athens, Greece. Athens may be known for its ancient ruins, but in the 70s and 80s, it was a city that thrived with bohemian cafes, rock music, and a nightlife scene that attracted artists and intellectuals. While modern Athens has evolved, the essence of that time still lingers in certain districts, where old vinyl shops, traditional tavernas, and retro cinemas remain untouched. One of the best places to soak up the 70s and 80s vibe is Exarchia, an area known for its alternative culture, political activism, and underground music scene. In the past, this neighborhood was filled with rock bars, poetry readings, and rebellious youth, and today, it still feels like a time capsule of vintage cafes, street art, and live rock music venues. For a throwback movie experience, check out one of Athens' open-air cinemas, where films are still screened under the stars, just like they were in the 70s. Many of these theaters, such as Cine Paris, have been around for decades and still use classic film projectors, adding to the nostalgic atmosphere. Athens' combination of sun-soaked streets, old-school charm, and a deep connection to its bohemian and rock and roll past makes it one of the most underrated destinations for revisiting the 70s and 80s. London's Soho. London's Soho district was the beating heart of the 80s music scene. This was where punk, new wave, and synth pop exploded, shaping the sound and style of a generation. Today, Soho still carries that rebellious energy, with old record stores, legendary clubs, and neon-lit streets that haven't changed much since the 80s. A visit to Barrack Street is a must for music lovers. This street was home to some of the most famous record stores of the 80s, and many of them still sell original vinyl pressings of bands like The Smiths, Depeche Mode, and The Cure. A walk through Soho's dimly lit alleys will lead you to iconic bars where the new wave and punk rock movements were born. For a true blast from the past, visit Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, where artists have been performing for decades, or step into the 100 Club, which hosted early gigs for punk legends like the Sex Pistols and The Clash. Soho's narrow streets, neon lights, and live music venues make it a timeless retreat into the bold and edgy world of 80s London. These destinations bring back the magic of the 70s and 80s, making them more than just trips. They're time machines. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where would you go first? Let us know in the comments.